wanted to say welcome, and I'm Erica Kustra. I'm the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Windsor in Southern Ontario. We're south of the United States, which makes us a little unusual. We're tucked in underneath. And I'm bringing you welcome from the Educational Developers Caucus. Our chair just had to step out for another meeting, Carolyn Hostler. She sends her greetings. And also from Denise Stockley, who is the Society for Teaching and Learning in Higher Education's president. She really wanted to be here, has been a strong supporter of this topic and connection. And she asked me to bring her greetings on behalf of STLHE. It's a real pleasure to have joining us Darryl Cathcart, Graham Cable, Darlene O'Neill, to talk about the potential of military-connected students in post-secondary education. And this is almost like a fireside chat, which is a good thing to be doing at this time of year. Nice and relaxing. I would like to bring you greetings, a land acknowledgement. We are all coming from a space. There is no place in the world, no land that has not been home to someone else before. And it's good to step back and realize and acknowledge that we are coming to join this virtually from very many different lands and in some cases different countries. And I encourage you and welcome you to post in chat where you're coming from, your location, so that people joining will know. But also if you have a land acknowledgement for your area, please feel welcome to add that into the chat and share that with others. And so we'll share those. I'm coming to you from the Three Fires Confederacy area, and I bring you welcome from Windsor. And I also would like to say we're going to be having things happening in chat. If you haven't seen already, there is a link to an open survey. I'll pop that link back in, but it's also showing at the end of the survey on the slide. And so please do share where you're from. We'll have a quick summary and we'll share that back in a moment. And I'm just going to stop sharing my slides for a second to pop back in the link for anyone who's new. Feel welcome to share the survey and answer some questions, just so that the facilitators will have a sense of where you're coming from in the context. And I can then share some of the results that are coming up. And, oh, my link is not working. So we will have to get you the summary that's coming out of those things in a moment. The link isn't connecting properly right now, but in the meantime, do feel welcome to finish out the survey and pop into the chat where you're coming from, any land acknowledgement that is a representation of your area. And also, sometimes it's helpful and interesting to see the different weather and time zones that people are connecting in from, because I believe, Darryl, you're connecting in from Germany.
Yeah, that's correct.
So I'm going to say welcome and turn it over to you, and you will have control of the slides.
Great. Thanks, Erica. So thanks everybody for joining us today. And I want to give a special acknowledgement to everybody who made this webinar come together. With a special thanks to Dr. Denise Stockley. As was already mentioned, she's the president of the Society for Teaching and Learning in Higher Education in Canada. I also clearly want to thank Darlene O'Neill and Dr. Graham Cable, and I'll introduce them in a bit, for helping me co-host this information session, this fireside chat, because what I hope to do at the end is to spur a discussion amongst all of us, and you can take back to your institution. So just a brief introduction about myself. My name is Darryl Cathcart, and I am a retired Canadian Armed Forces officer. After serving nearly 26 years in the infantry, inclusive of operations on 4 different continents, I retired in 2017, where I am now in my final year of a doctorate in education at Western University. Currently, I'm living in Germany as a result of my wife's employment. She's currently serving a senior Canadian officer so we're here for a little bit. So today is a discussion, is a chat, but I have some loose learning objectives that includes the introduction of this understudied group of military-connected students in Canada. And at the end, I'd like to provide a conceptual framework of an academic and a social support model for military-connected students. Today, we're going to discuss the potential of military-connected students, and they are those individuals with significant ties to the Canadian Armed Forces. That means they can be serving or retired. Without even being aware of the true size of the population in Canada, colleges and universities across the country have a military-connected student body. These students may be a member of a local reserve unit, that's to say a part-time soldier, sailor, or aviator, or enrolled in a postgraduate program that is a fully sponsored program by the Canadian Armed Forces. I will use post-secondary education and higher education interchangeably throughout, as this discussion is applicable to both universities and colleges. So military-connected students have access to a significant amount of funding, which enables the pursuit of post-secondary education. Meaning today, we see federally sponsored students with unique challenges and different lived experiences in the classroom without the benefit of a purposefully investigated and resourced academic and social support network. The outline of this webinar will move from the micro level with Dr. Graham Gable, who's going to talk about a military-connected student experience, meso level, where Darlene O'Neill will talk about an institutional approach, and then briefly we'll discuss a macro level where I'll provide some implications for Canadian educators. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Graham Gable. He's a retired British Army education officer who completed his doctorate after a medical release from the armed forces. Without sharing too much of his narrative and his success, because I want to leave that to him, Graham is uniquely positioned to describe his service, especially as a former education officer, and the complex challenges in moving from soldier to scholar. In keeping with our fireside chat theme, I'll narrate a discussion between and him. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this webinar. So as we begin, can you provide a brief synopsis of your military background and experience?
Yeah, sure. Assuming you can hear me, I was unmuting myself. Firstly, thanks very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to get involved in this sort of thing. I think these sort of initiatives concerning military-connected students are really, really important, whether that be in Canada, the UK, or indeed anywhere else. So thank you. I should also add that this doctorate I've got is very shiny and new. It's only been sort of awarded, I'm in the final throes of sort of doing all the admin in the last couple of weeks. So I put the title up there. It's the first time I've done it. I'm feeling embarrassed. You keep referring to me as Doctor now. You don't have to do that anymore. I think the point's been made. But
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. It is very new. So I'm still, sort of getting used to that fact. In terms of my background, I grew up here in the UK, not far from where I'm sitting at the moment, in a family that was sort of steeped in uniformed services. My dad was in the police. My mum was formerly in the police in the days when you had to, when you became pregnant, leave the police. That's not the case anymore, fortunately. My grandfather was a Royal Marines Army. My uncles were in the army. And so I was surrounded with that sense of uniform service, if you like. I also grew up in the countryside here in the UK, roaming around in sort of woodlands and building camps and dens and that sort of thing. But also, a point I'll come back to later, my mother, some years, I was around sort of 8 or something, started working in a university just up the hill, barely a mile from our house, and became an academic in that university. So I became familiar with the university environment. And then went on to do my own undergraduate degree. This was in the late 1980s, early 1990s. and decided to join what here in the UK, and you may have something similar in Canada, is the Officers Training Corps, which is a reserve element of the Army that's established in some universities to give, it has two sort of official purposes, I guess. One is to recruit future Army officers, and the second is just to give students, future employers, future leaders in society, like a sense of the military experience, so that if they then employ reserve personnel, members of the reserve forces, they understand what that entails, and they're sort of more generous in perhaps giving them time off, etc. I joined it because I wanted to try and get the military out of my system. It didn't. When I was casting around for what to do towards the end of my university degree, I ended up looking at joining the Army. I then went to Royal Military Academy Sandhurst and commissioned into the Education and Training Services branch, because to me that sort of gave me the opportunity to bring everything together, experience of sort of the university background I'd grown up with and the rest of the background I'd mentioned. So I went on and did that. I served in various locations in the UK, Europe, got to go on exercise in Latin America. My first degree was in Spanish, so I did some interpreting duties over there. I went on exercise in Sri Lanka, operations in Angola, because Portuguese was a subsidiary at university as well, so I spoke Portuguese. That was a UN operation. Went to Iraq, which I know many of you will be familiar with the background to that, in 2003, 4. Various other sort of teaching and educational management roles, and eventually ended up in Italy in a NATO role as a spokesman for headquarters, where I started to notice the symptoms of what turned out to be bowel cancer, which eventually led to my medical discharge, as Darryl mentioned, in 2011, which then heralded quite a difficult transition. So that is my military background in a nutshell, and I think you're going to ask me about the transition.
Yeah, that's right. That dovetails into our next question, Graham. Like, what are some challenges, some transition challenges from the military to civilian transition that you faced? What are some of the more significant challenges?
Yeah, I mean, there are, of course, practical issues surrounding moving from one career to another, loss of employment, if you've been compulsory discharged, in the case of a medical discharge, then you're dealing with sort of medical issues as well as trying to find a new job. And that doesn't bring with it just practical challenges, but I think emotional challenges as well. You know, in my case, as you've heard, joining the military was almost a sort of childhood ambition. I was almost conditioned to do that. And then suddenly it was all taken away in an instant, if you like. That causes difficulties. But even for people who treat the military as a sort of instrumental process, it provides them with an income, a job, and experience, but they are willingly transitioning onto something else. They can still miss the sense of camaraderie, the family situation, the support structure, the social structure, etc., that military organizations necessarily generate. Because if you're going to send people to do sort of pretty crazy stuff, then you need to surround them by with a structure that at least gives them some sense of constancy and base and foundation. That when they're doing that stuff, they know that the home base is looked after. If they get unfortunately sort of injured or worse, then they will be looked after, their families will be looked after. When that all goes, that very intense structure and foundation can cause some problems as well. So I experienced that. For me also, the sense of loss of identity, because I'd sort of grown up into that. The military is very good at giving you, when you join the military, your pass off parade is trumpets, flags, horses, fireworks, service to the nation, etc., etc. And you absorb that. That's part of your identity. You are military. You're a rank. You're a cat badge, we say in the UK, maybe the same in Canada. Your regimental affiliation is very important. Your armed force affiliation becomes very important, because there's a sense of bonding and teamwork that goes alongside that. So you take that away, and it's kind of, what am I now? Apart from a sort of medic discharge, broken former army officer. And that cuts to the quick of your sense of self as well. You're asking sort of existential questions, I think. That then bleeds into the sort of motivations for doing a doctorate, which I think it's a good time to pause and perhaps let you ask that question, which I've already sort of on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I will not stop it.
Okay. So why did I do the doctorate? It emanated really from that kind of that existential sort of questioning where I was, what I was, where I was going, etc., etc. So for me, it was part of a rebuilding process. I used it to determine, what led me to favour a career in military in the first place. Why I missed it so much, what the essence of my sense of self was, but more importantly, perhaps, what else was important in my life and therefore could be used to rebuild that life. And for me, the two essential elements really were my family, who supported me throughout this process, and this interest in education and this sort of professional and personal kind of affiliation with education. So, the doctorate led me back into education directly as a student, but also, I sensed it would be a professional stepping stone to re-immerse myself in a professional educational context, which it now has done. And you won't be aware, most of you here, that I'm now a postdoctoral research fellow in what's called the Forces in Mind Trust Research Centre, which is part of the Veterans and Families Institute for Military Social Research at the university here in the UK, Anglia Ruskin University. So it is my research and my experience, I think, have led me to use this to now altruistically attempt to help others navigate their own way through this very difficult transition process. That's why I did it, and I'm fortunate to be using it now, which I'm delighted to do.
So you talk about that cross-cultural shift and those identity challenges. So when you moved from the military to academia, how did you maintain your own motivation during graduate studies?
It's tough. It was a part-time course. There's all sorts of other things going on, which I've alluded to already, and many of you have been in exactly the same situation, have students who are in exactly the situation. I think what the military might do to help military-connected students in those situations is that sense of tenacity that that the military identifies and inculcates and develops in people. Helped me through. There's just absolutely no way I was going to give up. There were some knockbacks, of course, but that's part of the growth. But I was not going to let any of them prevent me from just recently sort of achieving this goal, if you like. And I think that that's something that anyone in the military would be familiar with, and it's not just the military. Of course, military or ex-military people are not the only people to be tenacious. But I think it does enable you to weather some storms in the academic context. I think that allied to knowing that it was going to enable me potentially to succeed better professionally in a second career, and happily it has done, is what kept me focused on that goal.
Are there any specific academic or social support entities that you relied upon during your education?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the staff at my university, where the doctorate was hosted, Canterbury Christchurch University, not far from where I am now, were like sort of parents, if you like, guiding me through the process, probing, providing materials, spurring me on, supporting me, particularly my thesis supervisory team towards the end. I should add that it's a professional doctorate, so there's a taught element, a couple of years of taught sort of modules, if you like, which you're handheld and guided through the doctoral preparation process. You then undertake the thesis, and just like in Canada, you'll have a supervisory team that support you in that as well. Those people were instrumental. But I should also add that the cohort that we did the taught phase with were, because we were all going through it together, that it was almost like a sort of sense of military kinship, in that we bonded really tightly, and we had WhatsApp groups, and we met up for pizza and stuff. That was really important. So that was a sort of social and academic dual support mechanism. My family, I've mentioned, they were undoubtedly absolutely crucial during this process. Those are the key elements, I think.
So let's think of educators, Graham. How best do you think educators can support military-connected students?
I think, I think listening and being sensitive to that military experience, to those students' military experience is key. Some of what they tell you may be shocking, some of it may be dull. You may not particularly want to, I don't know whether the phrase is used in Canada, but we talk about swinging the lantern, pulling up a sandbag and swinging the lantern when everyone just starts going on about, all their military stories and what have you. And, I know that gets a bit tedious in the end. I saw people's eyes glaze over when I was sort of in full flush of those stories. But I think it's important to give the, to just try and get an insight into those students' experiences, because it's important to the students. And I think it's important, therefore, that the educators understand those experiences, because often that's what drives students. It's certainly what drove me. And it can be the root of potential problems. So if you are to support them well, as I know all educators will wish to do, and will almost instinctively do, if not instinctively do, is want to get to know the students. I think that's key. And part of that is understanding the military experience. In turn, you'll get an awful lot of rewards and hard work, etc., from those military-connected students. So it's well worth the investment, I would prefer.
Listen, my final question. How do you think military-connected students can prepare themselves for post-secondary or higher education?
I think, as I mentioned before, I think, to harness their tenacity that they will have shown during their military careers, but also to be prepared to discover, much about themselves as well as their subjects, and also to work hard. If you're going to make success for it, and it's going to be rewarding, then you have to work hard, as we all know, and be prepared to take some knocks. These things don't come easily. If you want to grow and develop and learn, then you've got to be prepared to be open to that learning, and that will involve being critiqued when you need to be critiqued, etc. And that can be difficult sometimes, as we all know, but that's part of the growth process. So those would be my key tips for military connected students. Okay, great. Well, that was excellent, Graham. Thanks for sharing your story and your success with us. I'm going to open it back up to you later on for some questions or discussion if folks have that. Now I'd like to introduce Darlene O'Neill. She's the Director of Student and Entrepreneurial Services at Fanshawe College in London, Ontario, Graham, not London in the UK. Darlene holds a Master of Education from Mount St. Vincent University on the East Coast. And as a civilian, Darlene worked for the Department of National Defense. And the interesting thing about that is she's a former military-connected student even before we started looking into this. So Darlene, thanks for being here. We've got a couple of questions for you. Can you provide a brief synopsis of your own background and experience with Canada's military and military-connected students?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And Graham, thank you for sharing your story. So my background, I am a Navy brat, born and raised in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We lived in Lahr, Germany. My parents did 3 tours in Lahr. I have a brother who is a retired Air Force member, and he actually left the Air Force and has since been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I have a father who was a sailor. For 21 years, I worked for Maritime Forces Atlantic as the Human Resources Business Manager for the 7,000 civilians that support the military on the East Coast. And I see Rob nodding his head. I'm a graduate of St. Mary's University as well. So my undergrad was St. Mary's. I was supported through both of my graduate and my undergraduate degree by the Department of National Defense. And I landed in London, Ontario, and I have the privilege of working with the former Chief of Land Staff for the Canadian Forces. He is now our president of Fanshawe College, General Peter Devlin. So that's why I think Peter has asked me to co-lead our project on military connected campuses with Darryl.
That's great, Darlene. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So you talked briefly about the president's connection to the Canadian Armed Forces and the Canadian Army. Overall, what do you think the motivation is for Fanshawe to explore the military-connected student phenomena?
Yeah, so I believe Fanshawe is motivated to do this simply because Fanshawe believes in unlocking potential. That's our vision at the college, and we know that our military colleagues and comrades across the country, they protect the potential of that which we unlock. So we actually want to be seen as an institution that supports military-connected students, provides recognition of their values to their country, their values to service, and supports their identification as a military-connected student. As well, we live in southwestern Ontario, where there are a huge number of veterans and reservists here in southwestern Ontario, and we want to be able to support that.
Great, thanks. In doing this, in supporting military-connected students, what are some key elements that need to be addressed in the organizational change or the organizational shift in order to form an inclusive environment for this diverse group of adult learners?
Yeah, great question. So some key elements that we've identified through the process that we're actually living through right now. The first thing we did was we identified a steering committee that works collaboratively together to support the cultural shift that's going to need to happen. Through identifying that steering committee, we then set out to say, okay, who are the students that we currently have? Are they military-connected students? And so we partnered with our institutional research folks and surveyed our students, and we did find out that we do have military-connected students at Fanshawe College. We actually have 23 of them that self-identified. And interestingly enough, the myths around military-connected people landing in maybe a trade, was busted immediately from our survey, because we have a military-connected student in every faculty at Fanshawe College. Once we identified our students, we held a focus group with them and found out what their needs are, what their impressions are, their experiences with Fanshawe. We've also partnered with our marketing folks, and we have created a landing page with frequently asked questions for military-connected students, and we're creating an outreach marketing campaign and a tailored attraction strategy so that military-connected students know that they're going to be welcomed and embraced at Fanshawe. And the other thing that we're doing is working on social support systems to ensure that when you're at Fanshawe and you're a military-connected student, that you have the appropriate supports in place to help you be successful. And in November, we're really excited to be launching the whole military-connected campus.
That's great. Thanks for highlighting some of the initiative that you guys are doing, and there's no doubt that it is going to provide a great foundation. So in doing that and exploring these initiatives, especially in a resource-constrained environment, how can Fanshawe really facilitate enrollment, retention, and graduation for this group of adult learners?
Well, Darryl, in a resource-constricted environment or restricted environment, the very first thing you need to do is leverage the resources that you have currently. So we are leveraging, of course, our president and his connections and his the deep respect that Canada has for Peter Devlin. We're also leveraging the students that we currently have that have self-identified, and they're actually going to become ambassadors for us and leaders in the institution. Secondly, we are leveraging the staff that we have at Fanshawe that are military connected people, because they understand the culture and they can be support people for the students that we have. We're making sure that we build solid partnerships with our community partners and that are military connected. And we're also ensuring that we take advantage of the rich services that we have at Fanshawe, and hopefully with some leveraging, we can ensure that we have a dedicated military support person on staff in the future.
So let's talk about educators. That's a great answer. And let's focus in on the educators who really are on the front line, no pun intended, between the institution and the learner. How best can we support educators at Fanshawe in engaging their military connected students?
Right, good question. So one of the things that we've actually started with Fanshawe's educators is educating them. Basically, we are teaching them all about the culture of a military connected person. The fact that the familial connection is important. The insignia connection is important. The value of service is important. Their operational requirements need to be supported if they're reservists and called to active duty. The emotional, psychosocial supports need to be in place. They might need extra time in writing exams or being accommodated, supported that way. So I think, you know, the key is we've started with senior leadership at the college, and we've opened our military training workshops to all academics at the college, as well as anybody that's in an advising role, so that we're able to all start from the same framework to be in a position of knowledge and support to help our students.
Great. Let's change that question around a bit and look at the military community, because the military community are providing the military connected students. Is there anything that the military community can do to support transition to higher education, memorandums of understanding, agreements, things of that nature?
Absolutely, and we have engaged in a memorandum of understanding with our local reservist regiment. It's called the Civilian Military Leadership Pilot Initiative, and that CMPLI, as every academic and military institution love acronyms, the CMPLI is an initiative where military connected students that engage in student life activities at the college are going to be recognized through their regiment, as well as at graduation with an annotation on their degree or diploma. And they will also be invited to wear their uniforms to graduation. And we have a couple of our actual retired military folks that are faculty at the college that are pretty excited about that also want to wear their insignia at graduation. So we're all for that. So that's one of the ways that we can partner as well. We're looking at reaching out to, of course, Veterans Affairs, our local legions. Our St. Joseph's Hospital is famous for their military support clinics here in Canada. And we're building partnerships that way. We're also investigating creating a military connected student bursary or scholarship. And we have General Dynamics right here in London, so we're going to go after General Dynamics and see if they'll support such a bursary.
Great, thanks. So my final question, Darlene, how would you measure success at the college?
Well, at the college, I think we measure success when a student can reflect on their experience in a positive manner when they know that they've been accepted for who they are and what they bring to the institution. And ultimately, of course, in any academic institution, success is graduation, but also becoming an ambassador for the group and staying engaged and supporting those that come after you. So my hope is that our military-connected students that go on to graduation will become community ambassadors and will share their positive experiences that they've had at Fanshawe as military-connected students.
Great, thanks for that, Darlene. We'll open it up for questions or comments for you in a few minutes. So let's move on to the last segment, and I'm going to provide a couple of slides here. There we go. So the Canadian Armed Forces is a learning organization where a series of educational reimbursements programs exist, from full sponsorship to part-time studies. That being said, currently there are some aspects of the education reimbursement that are suspended and under review. However, this does not impact the intake of undergraduate students or annual calls for sponsored postgraduate opportunities. It's important to note that not all undergrad or postgrad students attend the Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston or Collège Militaire Royal in Saint-Jean, Quebec. Many universities and colleges have formed partnerships with the Department of National Defense in the pursuit of higher education. In 2018, so on the far right-hand side of this timeline, the federal government announced an education and training benefit for Canadian Armed Forces veterans that translates to a wonderful funding opportunity of between $40,000 for those who served 6 or more years in the military, up to just over $83,000 for those who served 12 or more years. Yeah. This is a significant federal investment in veterans education. For illustrative purposes, I've inserted on the slide are 2 major dates surrounding the U.S. Servicemen's Readjustment Act, known as the GI Bill, that was created in 1944. I have done this intentionally.
Slides aren't showing. They've disappeared.
Sorry, we can't see the slides. Unfortunately. Yeah, they flashed up briefly, as I think Erica mentioned in the comments.
We'll try this again. How's that?
Yay, yeah, I've got them.
Perfect.
Looks good. Looks
well,
good.
The good news is I'm only getting to the slide at this point, so you didn't miss anything other than the preamble and the introduction. So for illustrative purposes, I've inserted the US GI Bill in that started in 1944. It's not fair to compare Canadian benefits into a US culture and institution. That being said, some qualitative results in terms of what we could be doing and exploring for social and academic supports have some relevancy, but clearly the culture between a US environment and a Canadian environment is vastly different. A recent study out of the University of Nevada quoted the US General Accounting Office in saying that education benefits were one of the most commonly cited reasons for joining the military. In Canada, we're just not there yet. For colleges and for Canadian colleges and universities, the introduction of the education and training benefit translates to an opportunity to welcome veteran students on campus in a manner that has not been witnessed since the mid-1950s, just after the end of the Korean War. During the early 20th century, millions of service members fought battles around the globe where Canada recognized a need to support returning veterans. Those veterans put their families on hold, their careers, their education, and business opportunities for voluntary service in the national interest. The evolution of Canada's veteran reintegration support grew from land compensation to various forms of legislative assistance, to providing federal assistance for education and training between 1915 and 1956. While supporting ill and injured veterans has been an enduring task of Veterans Affairs Canada, which has been expressed through various iterations of the Veterans Charter, the targeted facilitation of post-secondary program has been dormant in Canada for a number of decades. Finally, dead and wounded soldiers are a clear reminder of the nation's sacrifice, and contemporarily speaking, the international engagements of the Canadian Armed Forces over the past 20 years have exposed gaps in care and civilian reintegration strategies employed by the federal government. Arguably, these events appear to have been the political stimulus for the implementation of the new Veterans Charter in 2006, where the emanating from that was the introduction of the education and training benefit in 2018. This investment in veterans transition and the continued promulgation of a strategy that guides ex-service members towards autonomy in a post-military environment. Historically, Canada has benefited from veterans who left duty and meaningfully contributed to society, the nation's labor force, and ultimately the economy. So if we look at military-connected students, I talked earlier that they have significant ties to the Canadian Armed Forces, and really there are a number of subcategories of a military-connected student. Current serving members in the regular force, the full-time military, primary reservists, part-time military, veterans I spoke of, Department of National Defense civil servants, and under a very narrow set of criteria, immediate family members of a CAF service member or a veteran. All these subcategories of military-connected students may be offered substantial funding for educational reimbursement. I've also added foreign military service members on there. As we know, Canadian colleges and universities attract a large number of international students, as some of whom are most likely foreign military service veterans who may have access to funding from their own nations. So as we build an academic and social support network, it's important to understand the demographic of military-connected students. So if we look at some implications over the next two slides, it's certainly an underrepresented group of students in Canada. These are nascent discussions, very limited research, and with over 5,000 regular force service members leaving the military every year who have access to the Veterans Affairs Canada education and training benefit, we start to form a pool of individuals who can be fully sponsored to return to post-secondary education. If we're looking internally in the military, as I said earlier, the Canadian Armed Forces is a learning organization that supports lifelong professional development. So if we start to think of online courses, especially where some of our bases are located in more austere parts of the country, not located near brick and mortar institutions, this provides us another opportunity at the local and regional level. If we look a little closer to campuses, we have a wide swath of reservists, 186 Canadian Army Reserve units in 86 cities and towns across Canada. A large number of reservists currently attend colleges and university, and it may be subject to some funding. So in aggregate, we're looking at an underexplored, potentially fully funded student population that we can start to market towards and attract in post-secondary education. So if we unpack those numbers just a little bit more and we look at a regional spotlight, and I want to go from Halifax to Ontario to Edmonton. They all have different implications. If I knew we would have had somebody from the University of New Brunswick here today, I would have focused on Fredericton. Those implications would be the same as I'm about to speak of in Edmonton. So we look at Halifax, clearly one of Canada's two main maritime bases, 11,000 service members, predominantly of the Royal Canadian Navy. You add in the veterans in the greater Halifax area, we have a significant population of potential military-connected students. If you think of the employment of the Navy, clearly some people will be on ship and deployed, a potential online opportunity, and some people, you know, dockside and attending colleges and university. We start to bring that towards the national capital region of Ottawa. Our national headquarters is there. The majority of service members serve in Ontario. So it's no surprise that we see 24,000 plus or minus Canadian Armed Forces service members with a very large veteran population. And again, we start to build those implications for a large military-connected student population. Now, if we flip it and go out to Edmonton and look at the Army, roughly 5,000 service members in Edmonton, predominantly Army. We need to understand the type of employment an Army soldier does, some of whom do not have transferable skills to the civilian sector and civilian industry, meaning that there is a great potential that those individuals are going to enter post-secondary education upon release of the Canadian Armed Forces, or can do some continuing education prior to release. Again, presents us another opportunity. And with 6,000 veterans in the Edmonton area, that simply increases that military-connected footprint. So if we look at the implications even a little bit more closely, a little bit more in depth, 60% of regular force members are junior non-commissioned soldiers, sailors, and aviators. What that means is they most likely don't have post-secondary diploma or an undergraduate degree. Furthermore, Veterans Affairs Canada found that 34% of military occupations are not transferable to the civilian sector, meaning there's a likelihood that folks with the education and training benefit are going to return or enter post-secondary education in order to be more competitive. So if we think back to Halifax and Ottawa and Edmonton, we begin to build a picture of how big this potential could be with the right strategies in place at colleges and universities. So to help with that, here's a conceptual framework that may meet the needs, the academic and social support needs that we heard of. We heard of the social support largely from Graham. We heard a lot of academic support from Darlene. And if we put your institution in the middle of this, and through a military-connected student lens, we can start to frame better relations with the military community, whether they're regular force or reservists, leverage the community services that are already existing in your area, but through a military-connected lens, build on social support in terms of advocacy with existing veterans groups. You know, Darlene spoke of training initiatives that all of the faculty, staff, and administration are are partaking in at Fanshawe. Clearly, this leads to, we look at the potential of this large student body. It leads to a very deliberate outreach strategy. And part of this process is having the military-connected student involved, gaining the voice of those adult learners who are going to have a very challenging time given their lived experience, their potential age on returning or entering post-secondary education. And finally, partnered organizations. In a lot of cities and towns across Canada, we have colleges and university in the same spot. You know, so this provides an ample opportunity to exploit those relationships that already exist in terms of a military-connected framework. So finally, in summing up here, you know, when I think about military-connected students, I always look at the attraction, the retention, and the graduation, and how best we can form strategies in order to do that. So I think about this in trying to get military-connected students at the college or university, try to have the university retain them through a very robust and innovative framework. And then ultimately, as Darlene said, graduate them and put them back into Canadian society much better armed than they were when they released from the Canadian Armed Forces. So listen, we have about 7 or 8 minutes left. And what I'd like to do at this point in time is to turn it over to you to ask any questions or generate a discussion on anything that we've covered. You know, Graham's remarkable success story, Darlene's approach at the college, or any of the macro level implications. So please, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to share.
But maybe I'll just kick things off there, Darryl. Thank you so much. I mean, this is just tremendously valuable, I expect, for everybody on the call. Just a quick bit of context from here in Halifax, and it's great that Darlene is on the call. It's always great to have an alumna on the call as well. My quick background on this, president of St. Mary's, and we're here in a garrison city, and our eldest son is a reservist, and we've worked very hard to maintain and build connections. I participate in the Canadian Leaders at Sea program through the Royal Canadian Navy, but I've been busy trying to build elements of a military-connected campus without really you having the terminology and the skill set. So I've gained a lot from this discussion in terms of the outreach that we have with the base commander, with the Rear Admiral, successive Rear Admirals here in Halifax, and with 5th Division. In fact, I always joke with the Brigadier General of 5th Division that they're called the Mighty Maroons, and maroon is our color. So we keep building these connections. I've been doing programs that bring reservists to campus to try to uncover that really important point that was made earlier about who are military-connected students, and we often simply don't know. You have to work through institutional analysis to see who's supported, and it's a very difficult thing to do. So we've got a lot of work to do, I think, in terms of building connections to students as we go. One question I want to just throw out to everybody, though, I'm becoming particularly concerned about the support for military families. And Graham, you made a very valuable point about how important family was as part of the support network. You know, 3 weeks ago, I was on the waterfront here in Halifax as HMCS Fredericton returned. And that was a powerful moment in the history of Halifax. And this is a city and a port that has a history of those powerful moments. The ripples from the Fredericton resonate right through this community. So I'm very interested in ways in which a military-connected campus can actually be part of support for military families, beyond and bolstering, for example, the Military Family Resource Center that we have and probably exists in many other cities. So interested in comments from others about how the military-connected student is also part of a broader community and family support network and what our institutions can do.
Anybody want to take that on? So Rob, your first part, I help colleges and universities build that framework. So if you ever want to get in touch with me, by all means, we can have a more in-depth discussion, you know, at your convenience. Families is an interesting one. Perhaps this will spur the discussion. You know, we've included military-connected students that family member, that immediate family member. Veterans Affairs Canada offers programming for an in-service death for a child dependent and vocational training for spouses for in-service death or wounded service members. Now, you know, one of the outcomes, as you well know, and most of us are probably familiar with, charitable support organizations across Canada since Afghanistan have been funding a lot of those things. And this is the reason, Rob, why I didn't want to draw the parallel and just say, hey, Canada has a USGI bill. No, we don't. The education and training benefit is not for families, it's for the retired service member. And there are vast differences between the USGI bill. So a lot of work, I think, from my perspective to be done on families. There are a few programs that are available, but it certainly doesn't address the question, you know, when you have somebody from a maritime city moving from Halifax to Victoria and that spouse is trying to get a new employment. Darlene?
So one of the things that just popped in my head, Rob, was when you're doing orientation is inviting the family members to participate fully in all the orientation activities for the military connected people, as well as recognizing them throughout the student's journey, recognizing the family members at graduation, recognizing the family members and the contributions of the support that they've given to the member. I think that that could be really important. Yeah, that would be sort of the very first piece of feedback I would give.
Great, that's very helpful. The other thing, and you'll be pleased to know that I have a discussion set up with the president of Mount St. Vincent University in 2 weeks' time, because we want to use our roles as university presidents to put a little bit of leverage on some of the political access that we have to see greater support, particularly for organizations like Military Family Resource Centers and others, where, to your point earlier, Darryl, it's been run essentially as a charitable organization and it's off to the side. And we've got to start taking a much more systemic approach to what military connectedness means and bluntly what the role of our educational institution has in making those connections happen. So thank you. These are great responses. I don't want to monopolize the topic, but thank you so much. Very much appreciated.
So we only have about a minute left, and there's a question in the chat about success rates. And, you know, evidence from the United States, they've spent billions of dollars. And I had 2 dates on my slide. One was called the post 9/11 GI Bill. And since then, they've spent billions of dollars, given the amount of US service members who are in higher education. And their success rates are still hovering around 50%. So in terms of money spent versus graduation, I would offer that they are not there at this point in time.
We're just at the hour point. I wanted to say thank you so much to the facilitators today. It was a phenomenal experience to hear all the different aspects and the facts and the stories and the narratives combined. We're very powerful together. Thank you very much. And I know we've reached the end of time and the end of formal recording, but I know I'm willing to stay on a few minutes after informally if people didn't have a chance to raise some questions. And I'm not sure if the speakers are able to, if any of them are, but we welcome, I will stay on and we can collect some things in chat as well. So thank you so much to everyone. And thank you to Jay, who is our technical support, and to the facilitators who led a phenomenal and incredibly useful sharing of information. Thank you. And clap.
Great. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for